Hi, welcome to the small shed. This Saturday you can see once again my scattergun approach to doing any sort of project is back at the fore. See you in a minute. Now this is a classic example of the problem that I have all the while, and I still can't discipline myself out of it, although it's got a lot better. One project tends to make you want to do something else, and then you see another thing and that's shiny and you just carry on like that. I can't somehow seem to settle on one thing, see it through and finish it, and it doesn't matter how I try. I don't think at 70 plus I'm going to change my ways. So I'm just going to embrace it this week. I wanted to get one of my railway locomotives sorted out, weathered and able to run. It was one that I discovered in the bedroom the other day and forgotten I'd bought even, and I'll mention that in another future video when you see it. But one of the things it involved was fitting a decoder chip in it for the sound system on it, and that in turn has led me to thinking, well, I ought to get it run in first before I do that, because they recommend running the engines in when they're new. So that took me onto my little chassis jig that I've got, which runs things in, and that then highlighted the fact that there was a fundamental problem with that. So let's just start having a look at that. I can explain what it does and what we need to do. It's a fairly simple job. I don't quite know how I'm going to fix it yet. There's probably 3 or 4 different solutions. So this is the chassis jig. I keep it in a Stanley organiser up in the workroom, along with all the other railway stuff that I've got in the same container, so I'm anxious to keep it in the same container, and it sits in there fine. So far so good. I'll just take it out for the moment and explain what it does, and then you can see where maybe the problems lie. So this is designed effectively to make sure that when you're putting a locomotive chassis together, the axles are square and straight, at right angles to the chassis and in the same plane together as one another. And effectively what you do, you can adjust the length of these spacings between the centre one purely and simply by altering those thumb screws on the end, and you then drill your holes in the chassis, and hopefully, if they're both the same, you can then put your spacers or whatever you need in and pop the other side on and solder it all up, and you know that everything is square and will run properly. So far so good. If it doesn't, which in the past I have had that situation occur, the other thing you can do, of course, is to widen the holes out very slightly. You can see that one's been done at some point, because they obviously weren't quite in line, and you can put a bearing in, put it back on the jig and then solder it all up, and again you know exactly where you're going. Fine. That's all very good, and it works perfectly like that. However, the problem comes with the accessory that they added to it, which is very useful, but it has a fairly fundamental flaw, and that takes the form of these 3 units, which are small ball bearings, and you effectively undo these bottom Allen screws, you push that jig onto that axle, and then you connect the Allen bolt through. Very useful, as I say, for actually running the engines in, because you can just connect 12 volts or whatever up to the either side of this, because it's on an insulated block, and it will just quietly run on the rollers. Job done. So that would all go on there, but the problem comes when you put a locomotive on it, because at that point the whole thing tips over, because there is no clearance underneath that to stop it tipping forward. There's no packer, I mean, underneath that to stop it tipping forward. Now, because I want it to fit back in that box, it's got to pretty much keep the same footprint as it has now. Ideally, you'd either make a bigger base. Now, I don't want to do that because I really don't want to unscrew this from its original mount. This was set up by the guy that made the jig. I suspect it would all go back down exactly the same if I unscrewed it and screwed it back down again, but I don't want to, on the basis that it might not, and then that would just negate that. The point of the whole thing would just be pointless. In the past, you can see I've just screwed it down to the tabletop with those two screws, but I wanted something a little bit more permanent. Now, the lift is about 18mm, same as the blockboard I've got there, and so yes, a bigger base would be good, but I don't want to take it off there, so I can't do that. I toyed with the idea of putting a hinged piece that went underneath that would work that way, that would just fold out, but again, the constraints of height mean that I haven't really got the room to fold another 18mm underneath it. It'll mean it won't fit in that box, and then I'm back to square one with a problem from that. So I've been trying to think of lots of different things. I thought if I had some form of base that was on a swivel, one at the front, one at the back. The one at the back would swivel round that way, and the one at the front could swivel round that way, and those would do me. If I put some metal like that, that would stop the problem. So that was the first iteration of it. What I've actually come up with now, I dug out my pack of metal, and I think what I've come up with now is slightly better, and that is to have a sleeve inside this MDF. I'll have to position it so it avoids screws and things, but I'm going to drill a hole in the middle, put a sleeve in, and then have a piece of brass rod, that's solid brass there, that will slide in and out on that will slide out with just basically with a flat on it and a small foot effectively that will bring it down to the right height, so that I can fold it up to roughly within the confines of that gap that I've got, which is about 20 or 30mm wider than this, and then when I want to use it I can just pull that plate out and it will rest on the front, and that will solve the problem. So it's a fairly simple solution. The only thing I've got to do really now is make sure I get that hole drilled exactly in the right plane, in the right position, so I can do that, and I'm going to put that on the drilling machine to do that. And so that's the gap I've got really that's available, which is 25mm. So I've got a bit of fairly substantial 25 thereabouts mil brass. Let's have a look and see what that is. Yes, 25mm brass. So I think if that is in there, probably about that long, 150mm, something like that. And what it means is I can actually bend the feet down, because the tube will be above centre or about on centre of the MDF, so I'll need to have a little bit of something below it, so either some feet on the underneath of this or to bend this down will give me that little bit of support that it needs. So let's go and see where we go with the hole in it. Now I've set the base plate up with the square so that is at right angles. I've marked a spot where I think the hole should be. There is a screw running through there. I think I should clear it, but I will keep an eye on that one. I might need to slack that screw off later on, we'll see. I'm drilling at the moment, I think about something like 1/2 mil under size, although we will see when we actually get the hole done how that works out. Just try that in and see what happens. Yeah, that's just not quite there at the moment, so that's good. That will mean that the final cleaning out drill will not be taking too much material out. That's going to be a nice knock-in fit there, I think. Yeah. Don't think I'm going to need any glue in this. It's not sort of splitting or disturbing the MDF, but it's going in really nicely and solidly, so leaves me enough just to tidy and file that off, I think, at the end, and then I can pop that in. Oh, I thought I'd distorted it, but no. So as long as I've got a piece that's long enough now in there with the 25mm underneath it, that should work okay and pull out and give me the support I need. So I'm just going to mark where on there I need to cut it, and then we can just saw the end off that and file it down and saw that off. Right, I've filed a flat on this tube. I was going to solder it all up, but I've decided that I might as well bolt it up. So I've just drilled a couple of holes through the cross piece. I've cut that to size. Just going to screw those in now. I've got some 4VA bolts, and that gives me a nice solid arrangement there. So I think all I need now is whatever spacing I need there. Now, as I say, I could have either bent that to suit, or I can come up with something underneath by way of like a foot. So we'll have a think about that for a minute and clean it all up, and hopefully it's nearly done then. Okay, so there we are. I've put some small pieces of walnut on the bottom and just glued those on, so that gives me a level on that cross piece that matches up with the height of the centre part. If I put a loco on the thing itself, you can see where the problem is. It just doesn't naturally sit on there without falling over. This now will push into there, and indeed can live in there all the while, and that just solves the problem. And then when I want to put it away, I can just go out the way like that, and I can take these pieces off. The whole thing will go away in its box without any problem. So I'm quite happy with that. I think we've got resolution to the problems, and it has, as usual, done my usual trick of opening up a whole other load of cans of worms, like that loco that's been under construction for probably the best part of 30 years or more, and I look at it and I think, well, actually there's not much needs doing to that, and then before you know where you are, I'm off on another different tack. So I've got to be a little bit careful. This was specifically designed to be done to get this other locomotive run in, so I'll set it up for that upstairs, go and give it a run, and hopefully we can get on mounting the decoder in a week or two's time. But I'm quite pleased with that. I just gave it a clean up on the polishing wheel just to tidy it up, but hopefully now I can drop it into its box and it should fit okay. That's the position it lives in. It's just right now. Don't need all those tap wrenches anyway, but again they're useful to keeping in that position. Those pieces go away in the right places, and the whole thing is now done and dusted. Right, so that opens up, as I said, a whole other load of cans of worms that will take me off in different directions, but you can see my problems now. But we get there in the end, I think. Hopefully the video is of interest. Look forward to seeing you next week. We'll be doing something different. See you then. Bye.